When we think about human history in a broad sense, we will eventually confront several questions. One of the most important of these is the question of human progress. This question asks, is it possible to identify a story of overall progress in human history? What do we mean by progress? In general, the concept of progress is associated with the idea that humanity is improving over time. To put this another way, to say that the human story is defined by progress would mean that humanity is gradually moving towards a state of perfection. Before we consider how we might approach the question of human progress, we need to consider why it is important. In the most basic sense, the question of human progress is important because it is one of several contentious ways of framing the human story. Let us consider some of those frames for a moment. Suppose that everything below this line represents everything from humanity's past. This would include things like our evolution, hunters and gatherers, the early river valley civilizations, all of the great Chinese dynasties, the 2 world wars, and globalization. Actually, let's imagine that below the line includes every event from human history. Now imagine that a historian wants to try to provide an overarching story or frame that makes sense of all of these events. There are really only a few options. The first option that has been popular is to use what we will call a theistic frame to make sense of human history. The Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions would be good examples of this approach. In this approach, people understand the human story in relation to an almighty God, who created humans and will one day bring human history to an end, perhaps in a day of judgment. The second option that has been used to explain human history is quite different to the first. This is what we might call the chaos frame. Essentially, this suggests that there is no orderly story that underlines human history. In the chaos frame, everything that happens is essentially random and chaotic. The third main option that has been used to explain human history is different again. This we will call the human decline frame. The human decline frame suggests that humans were originally quite moral, happy, and secure creatures who have gradually become more competitive, corrupted, and even dangerous over time. For example, someone promoting this might suggest that humanity has increased in their technological skill, but has mainly used this for destructive purposes, like war or environmental exploitation. The fourth main option that has been used to explain the human story relates to the third. This is what we will call the human progress frame. This suggests that over time, humans are improving. Often, it is related to our technical innovation and our ability to organize ourselves into complex and affluent societies. The fifth option that might be used to explain the human story we will call the cyclical frame. This approach suggests that the human story can be defined by neither progress or decline. Rather, it claims that human history tends to revolve around common forces and themes no matter what era we are examining. These forces might be biological forces like evolution or the desire to survive and mate. They might also involve tribal conflict or war. For example, someone promoting this view might suggest that human history is defined by a basic individual and collective attempt to avoid pain and increase pleasure. In reviewing these 5 options, the important thing to realize is that explaining the human story in terms of progress is only one of many approaches to explaining the human past. Our aim in this introduction is not to assess each of the 5 options, but to begin to analyze the human progress frame. So let's consider this more closely. Suppose that during a conversation one day, your friend Patricia makes the following claim. I think that humanity is becoming better over time. How could we begin to evaluate her suggestion? It might be best to start asking some questions of Patricia to clarify what she means by the statement. Firstly, does she mean that all humans are becoming better over time? Or does she just mean that most people are? She may have focused on a small portion of humanity to develop her conclusion. In doing so, she may have overlooked those parts of the world that seem to have stagnated or even gone backwards over time. Secondly, we might want to ask Patricia how exactly she thinks humans have become better. Have they improved in their knowledge and scientific innovation? Or have they become more moral and happy? It's possible that humans may increase their inventiveness but become less happy in the process. From this brief and simple example, we can begin to make some suggestions about how we might start thinking about the question of human progress. Number 1. If we are going to engage with the question of human progress, we need to consider the widest set of scenarios. If we focus on one region of the world, for example, it might appear that humanity is getting better over time. But this may not be supported if we examine other regions. In other words, we have to make sure that we consider the whole of humanity when we think about progress. Number 2. We have to be clear about identifying the specific domains in which we think progress, and perhaps decline, have occurred. For example, it might be possible to argue that humans have become more technologically advanced, but more spiritually or morally backward. In other words, we might have to consider differentiating our judgment by claiming something like the following. In the area of scientific innovation, humans have certainly improved, but this has come at the cost of a cooperative lifestyle that humans living thousands of years ago seem to have enjoyed. The third idea builds on the second, and here we suggest that the idea of progress is something that is complex. For example, it would be fairly simplistic to suggest that humans have progressed in a straight line without any interruptions since the first Homo sapiens evolved about 200,000 years ago. It may be more sophisticated to suggest that humans have progressed in an overall sense, but that in certain periods or in certain areas, stagnation or even regression has occurred. Finally, we have to be careful about making simplistic comparisons in this process. For example, it would not be fair to suggest that hunter-gatherer societies were more backward than modern industrial societies simply because they did not have computers. It was impossible for them to have computers, so it would be unfair to judge them on that basis. It might be more reasonable to compare the health of foraging and industrial societies, since that is something common to them both. So, what is an intelligent way to engage with the question of human progress? Based upon the ideas discussed so far, it might be helpful to begin by pointing out that we should probably avoid the more extreme options available to us, especially if they are simplistic. This might involve being cautious of adopting an interpretation that claims that the human story can be defined by 100% progress or 100% by something like decline. Instead, it is probably more sophisticated to begin thinking in this area somewhere. You may still think that the human story is defined largely by progress or decline, but thinking in this space allows you to accept that there may be evidence to suggest that some elements of the opposite might also be the case. In short, thinking in this space prepares you to make a more differentiated and complex judgment about the question of human progress. Whatever conclusions you draw about this question, we think that the best history always reflects the complexity of the past. Working with this complexity is part of what it means to develop skillful historical thinking habits. And this, after all, is what the Historical Thinking Handbook is all about. Thank you for watching.